About 100 protesters were arrested overnight at Dartmouth College and the University of New Hampshire, where state police were called in to help clear the encampments at both of those schools. Now, the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, said that the protests violated school policies. And Governor Sununu joins the program right now. It's good to see you again, Governor. Quick thoughts, perhaps, on President Biden's comments that Kelly just reported on, and any issues about what he said today about all of this before I ask you about your own state?
Well, look, I appreciate President Biden's words, but I think you said it. It's been 10 days. I mean, really 10 days since that we have heard from him. He should have been out there in front of this, as should have a lot of the local leadership earlier on. You know, what we experienced in New Hampshire last night, we were in front of it. We were preventative. And hats off to the president of Dartmouth, the president of UNH. They made it very clear to all the students exactly what was expected, what would be tolerated, what wouldn't, making sure there's a peaceful protest. Their First Amendment rights were secured. But if you're going to violate school policy, there's going to be accountability. And again, overall, it went very, very well here in New Hampshire. There were arrests, sure, but those are folks that were warned multiple times. They kind of knew they were going to be arrested. So at the end of the day, they got what they wanted.
I want to put those
classes resumed this morning, and there is a way to do this the right way.
I want to put those arrest numbers up on the screen to ask you about another point in all of this. We've seen it at the other schools. So at UNH, there you see about 12. Dartmouth, I think it was 90 plus that were arrested. Do you know what percentage of those were affiliated with either school? I ask you that because we have new reporting today that the arrests that were made at Columbia and City College in New York the other night, that we're told by the NYPD about 40% of those students were not affiliated with either school. Do you know the percentages in New Hampshire?
It was mostly students. We know that there were a few folks here and there that were from the outside, but yes, they were definitely mostly students in both instances. Okay,
what about the future there? How do you prevent something like that from happening again? What did you guys talk about after it all wrapped up last night?
Well, it was really about the communication. We did a lot of preventative communication. And like I said, the leadership at the schools are working with campus security, local law enforcement, state police, making sure there was a redundancy of systems there, regardless of what the situation might call, and making sure that everyone knew they were going to act quickly. They were going to act swiftly. They were going to give the warnings. But once the warnings were given, once it was clear the students didn't want to disperse and they were violating school policy, which they had been warned about, you know, ahead of time, everyone knew what was going to happen, and within a couple hours, the arrests were made. Everything was cleaned up. I don't think we had as much as a broken window. All classes resumed this morning. So that type of communication, that type of transparency at the ground, at the local level, that's really the key to this. If you let this stuff fester, if you don't call in law enforcement soon enough, if you don't, you know, get the message out early to the students about what is expected, that's exactly why things got worse at UCL and USC and Columbia. You got to nip this stuff. You can't be woke about it. You can't sit back. You can't be appeasing about it. You got to say, if you break the rules, there's going to be accountability and consequence.
What about when the police do move in? What's the tactical kind of approach, or did you get involved in encouraging them to, you know, approach this in a certain way? I mean, we've seen it different, to your point, across the country about, you know, even the University of Texas, I would add to that. Things got a little bit crazy there. I mean, what about any kind of a different approach in your state, or?
Yeah, so we have terrific law enforcement in the state. I would never tell them how to do their jobs, but what we were watching, they went in peacefully. They took one student out. They made the arrest. They processed. They went in peacefully, took another student out, made the arrest and processed. They did it the right way, and that's why things didn't get out of control. Because, again, they made it very clear to the students what was expected, very clear about the timing at which action would be taken. So the students kind of knew what was coming and what was going to happen. And you know, when you're communicative like that, you want to make sure they have that right of free speech. They have that right of peaceful protest. You violate rules and laws, here's going to be the consequences. You don't have to go in as, you know, as aggressively when you're not in panic mode, right? When you've prevented, when you've planned, a lot of things can go right.
Let me put up, it's on the telestrator, guys, just the map real quick, just to make the wider point about all this, wondering where you think it's all going, Governor, where there have been arrests. We're almost at 2,000 over the last 2 weeks. I think it was about 1,900 when we last you know, checked in on the total number of arrests. But look at it. I mean, it's all over the place. It's not just in the Northeast. It's not just out west. It's all over the country that we've seen these arrests popping up. What's the political impact of all this? It's in red states. It's in blue states. It's happening in a presidential election year. The sitting president just talked about it, as you said, for the first time. Really, what's the political impact of all this? Do we know?
Well, I look at it, I look at it as a generational impact. I mean, really, these are young people that have not had a lot of the opportunity to have good, quality, constructive education discussions about what this issue is really about in the classrooms. I think they've done phenomenally at Dartmouth. I think they've done it very well at UNH, that allowed the process to go so well when we had disruption here. But what they're doing is, when you don't have good quality discussion in the classrooms, they go to social media, they go to propaganda, they become basically useful tools of Hamas, a terrorist organization. I mean,
thanks so much for watching. Just go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.